Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. Last year, Arctic alarmists got very lucky. There was a substantial amount of thick ice all around the Arctic, but it wasn't located along the Alaskan coast. And during last spring, some unusual winds blew the ice away from the Alaskan coast. This is what the ice looked like on April 23rd of last year. And by this date last year, a lot of the ice had blown offshore. And 2 weeks later, the Alaskan coast was almost ice-free on June 6, 2019. This ice loss along the Alaskan coast during May was not due to melting because temperatures had been below freezing. It was just due to winds blowing the ice offshore. But once the ice was gone, the much darker seawater began to absorb sunlight, and temperatures of the water increased. This allowed Arctic alarmists like Time magazine to tell even bigger lies than what they normally tell. Time magazine said, "Parts of Alaska have no sea ice for the first time ever as temperatures in the region hit record highs." This was pretty bold disinformation for them because the Alaskan coast is ice-free every summer. This is what the ice looked like on September 22, 2017. And this map was published in National Geographic in 1971. Showing the ice offshore from Alaska by hundreds of miles. This graph of Arctic sea ice extent was published in the 1990 IPCC report, and it showed that sea ice extent was very low during the first half of the 1970s. We also know from the 1985 DOE report that sea ice extent was even lower during the 1950s. But climate alarmists now start their graphs in 1979, which was right at the peak of sea ice extent for the past century. This graph was published in the National Climate Assessment and shows how they carefully cherry-picked their start date. This is the 1990 IPCC graph again, and you can see how 1979 was carefully chosen. It was the peak. By starting their trend in 1979 and ignoring all the earlier low data, the National Climate Assessment is able to make it look like there's a linear trend downwards, when in fact Arctic sea ice extent is actually very cyclical. So now let's look at the current state of the Arctic. There's lots of thick sea ice off the coast of Alaska. It's looking nothing like last year. This was the map from this date last year. As you can see, Arctic alarmists just aren't getting a lucky break this year like they did a year ago. In 2008, leading experts in the United States, Canada, and Europe predicted that the North Pole was going to be ice-free that summer. Based on their nonsensical predictions, British swimmer Lewis Pugh tried to kayak from Svalbard to the North Pole. He only made it about 30 miles before he got blocked by ice. And this year, ice around Svalbard has been near a record high. The black line shows this year, and this blue line shows the 1981 to 2010 median. You can see that Svalbard ice extent has been far above normal this year. The ice around Svalbard this year is not only very extensive, but it's also quite thick. We can compare this with 1922, which was almost a century ago, when there was no ice around Svalbard at all winter long. Monthly Weather Review, November 1922, The Changing Arctic. The Arctic seems to be warming up. Reports from fishermen, seal hunters, and explorers who sail the seas about Spitsbergen, which is now called Svalbard, and the eastern Arctic all point to a radical change in climatic conditions and hitherto unheard of high temperatures in that part of the Earth's surface. Many old landmarks are so changed as to be unrecognizable. Where formerly great masses of ice were found, there are now often moraines, accumulations of earth and stones. At many points where glaciers formerly extended far into the sea, they have entirely disappeared. And last winter, the ocean did not freeze over even on the north coast of Spitsbergen. And here we are 98 years later with ice around Svalbard near a record high. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have increased by over 100 parts per million during the past century, yet the ice around Svalbard has increased. Climate alarmists base their belief system on a superstition that carbon dioxide controls the climate, so they keep making ridiculous predictions. According to NASA in 2007, Arctic sea ice was supposed to be gone by 2012. And Mark Cerise from the National Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado said that the Arctic is screaming. Well, the sea ice didn't disappear in 2012, so the BBC predicted it would be gone by 2013. That didn't happen, and then Nobel laureate Al Gore predicted it would be gone by 2014. This is the graph of Arctic sea ice extent going back to the start of MASI records in 2006. The red line is the 365-day mean. You can see there's been essentially no trend since the year 2006. Climate alarmists have no clue what they're talking about, and they use carbon dioxide as just one more invisible menace to control our behavior. Albert Einstein said, "Blind trust in authority is the greatest enemy of the truth." Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.